A dying lion, once king, was surrounded by jeering hyenas. They thought it was an easy meal. But they never expected his savior to be a mountain gorilla, a silent king from another realm, coming to repay an ancient debt. The sun over the Serengeti was a merciless, molten coin, pressing down on the plains with an ancient, indifferent weight. Heat shimmered in waves from the baked earth, distorting the horizon into a watery mirage. Acacia trees, gnarled and patient, stood like skeletal sentinels, their sparse canopies offering little reprieve. This was a land of spectacular life and sudden death, a kingdom governed by the twin laws of strength and opportunity, with no room for sentiment. And here, moving through the rippling sea of straw-colored grass, was a ghost. His name was Kaelen, a name that once meant, mighty warrior. And he had been. His roar had once been the thunder that silenced the plains, his magnificent, sun-bleached mane the crown of an undisputed monarch. Now, that mane was a tangled, matted mess, streaked with the ash-gray of age. A deep, unhealed wound in his hip had given him a stiff, agonizing limp, and his once golden eyes, sharp as chips of amber, were clouded with the milky film of time. The fire was still there, a single, defiant ember in the ruin of his body, but the fuel was nearly gone. He was a king in exile, deposed not by a rival, but by the slow, inescapable treason of his own body. He paused by a termite mound, the dust coating his nostrils, and his breath came in shallow, ragged rasps. Hunger was a familiar ache in his belly, but a deeper, more profound ache drove him on. It was a memory, flickering at the edges of his consciousness like a distant lightning storm. Years ago. Another blistering morning. He had been in his prime then, a creature of absolute power, his muscles rippling like coiled steel beneath his tawny hide. A sound had drifted on the wind, a sound that did not belong. It wasn't the cry of a cub or the screech of a bird, but a series of terrified, high-pitched shrieks, thin and desperate. Curiosity, mixed with the innate possessiveness of a king patrolling his borders, had drawn him toward the sound. There, beneath a fever tree, was the source. A young gorilla, barely more than an adolescent, was caught fast in the cruelest of man's inventions, a poacher's leg-hold trap. The serrated steel jaws had snapped shut on the ape's ankle, and with every panicked movement, the teeth bit deeper. The air was thick with the coppery scent of blood and raw fear. Vultures, the ever-patient cleanup crew, had already begun to circle overhead, their shadows passing like omens over the struggling creature. Kaelen felt no pity. Pity was a weakness the savanna could not afford. What he felt was a hot surge of fury. A profound disgust. This was not the law. The law was the honorable, bloody struggle between predator and prey, the swift claw and the failing hoof. This cold, inanimate steel, this stinking human artifice, was an obscenity in his kingdom. It was an insult to the natural order. He let out a single, guttural roar. It wasn't his full-throated challenge, but a low, vibrating growl of pure command that promised violence. The vultures, startled, scattered into the searing blue sky. He stalked forward, his gaze fixed not on the terrified gorilla, but on the trap itself. He didn't bother with the complex mechanism. With a grunt of effort, he clamped his powerful jaws around the metal stake anchoring the chain to the ground and, with a violent twist of his neck, wrenched it from the dry, cracked earth. The chain went slack. The trap, though still clamped to the gorilla's leg, was no longer a tether. The young ape stared at him, its dark eyes wide with a mixture of terror and utter confusion. Kaelen gave it a final, dismissive snort. His duty, as he saw it, was done. The trespass had been addressed. He turned, without a backward glance, and melted back into the tall grass, the morning sun glinting on his magnificent mane. He forgot the incident almost as soon as it was over, another trivial assertion of his authority in a life defined by them. He never knew that in the deep, silent mind of the young gorilla, the image of golden eyes and the sound of a liberating roar had been carved into memory, as permanent as a scar. The pride, Kaelen's pride, was no longer his. A younger, stronger male, a brute named Maru with muscles like bundled stones and eyes devoid of respect, now led the hunt. He had taken the pride not in a glorious battle, but through a slow, grinding campaign of attrition, exploiting Kaelen's every weakness until the transfer of power was a silent, foregone conclusion. Now, Kaelen was tolerated, a relic allowed to linger at the edges, fed on the scraps of kills he could no longer make. That afternoon, the scent of buffalo was heavy on the air. The herd was large, gathered near the riverbank, their dark hides thick with mud. Maru began to organize the lionesses, his movements arrogant and assured. He deliberately ignored Kaelen, shouldering past him as if he were nothing more than a rock. A flame of the old fire roared to life in Kaelen's chest. Humiliation was a more potent fuel than hunger. He would not be invisible. He would not be a ghost in his own kingdom. He would prove, to them and to himself, that the heart of a king still beat within his failing frame. With a defiant grunt, he pushed his aching body forward, ignoring the throbbing pain in his hip, and joined the hunt. The chaos erupted in a storm of dust and thundering hooves. Lions exploded from the grass, a blur of tawny muscle and flashing claws. The buffalo herd panicked, a churning mass of horns and fury. Kaelen, running on pure, desperate pride, locked his eyes on a young bull that had become separated from the others. He summoned the last reserves of his strength, a phantom echo of his former power, and lunged. For a glorious second, it was like the old days. His claws found purchase in the buffalo's flank. The bull bellowed in pain and rage. But Kaelen's aging body betrayed him. His grip, once unbreakable, faltered. The bull, feeling the weakness, spun with surprising agility. Kaelen saw the horn coming, a flash of white death, but he was too slow, too tired to evade it. The impact was a cataclysm of pain. The horn drove deep into his side, lifting him from the ground as if he were a bundle of dry leaves. He was tossed, weightless and broken, through the air. He hit the ground hard, the impact forcing the last of the air from his lungs in a wheezing gasp. He rolled into a thicket of tall grass, his world a dizzying vortex of dust and agony. The thunder of the hunt moved on. The pride, led by Maru, swept past him in pursuit of easier targets. Kaelen lay still, his ribs a cage of fire, blood trickling in a warm, sticky stream down his side. He tried to rise, to let out a roar of defiance, but only a pathetic, gurgling cough escaped his throat before he collapsed again. Through the haze of pain, he saw Maru glance back. Their eyes met for a fleeting, terrible moment. In Maru's gaze, Kaelen saw no concern, no shock. He saw only a cold, calculated assessment, and then, dismissal. The new king turned his head and continued the chase, consciously leaving his predecessor to the mercy of the plains. The abandonment was a wound deeper and more final than the one in his side. In that moment, Kaelen knew he was truly alone. And as the sounds of the hunt faded, a new sound began to creep into the sudden, dreadful silence. A sound of giggling. First one, then two, then a dozen. They slunk from the underbrush, their hunched, powerful shoulders moving with a practiced menace. The hyena pack. Drawn by the scent of blood, they were the opportunists, the merciless collectors of the wild's debts. They were led by a large, scarred matriarch, her eyes gleaming with a greedy, intelligent light. Their signature, unnerving laughter echoed across the grass, a sound that turned the stomach cold. It was the sound of impending death. They formed a loose, swirling circle around Kaelen, a tightening noose of snarling teeth and dripping saliva. They were in no hurry. They savored this moment, the sight of a fallen monarch brought low. One darted in, nipping at his hind leg, and Kaelen summoned the energy for a weak, guttural snarl that barely stalled them. A shadow passed overhead. The vultures had returned, taking their positions in the branches of a dead tree, waiting for permission to descend. Miles away, on the misty, verdant slopes of the Virunga volcanoes, a different kind of king sat in contemplative silence. His name was Kongo. His back was as broad and dark as a slab of obsidian, his brow a heavy shelf of bone that shadowed thoughtful, intelligent eyes. His kingdom was not the sun-scorched plain, but a cool, damp world of giant lobelias and tangled green vines. He was a creature of profound strength, a silent patriarch who ruled his family group with a gentle but absolute authority. A breeze, born on the hot plains below, drifted up the mountainside, carrying with it a complex tapestry of scents. Damp earth, sweet blossoms, the musk of his own family. But today, it carried something else. Something faint, yet deeply resonant. The scent of dust and blood, sharp and metallic. And woven within it, an almost imperceptible trace of something else, the scent of a lion. Kongo's nostrils flared. His great head lifted. The scent triggered something deep within him, a memory that was not a narrative, but a chaotic flash of pure sensation. The searing, biting pain in his own ankle. The reek of his own terror. The suffocating heat. And then, a deafening, liberating roar and the sight of magnificent, golden eyes that held not the hunger of a predator, but the cold fury of a king. He remembered the sudden slackening of the chain, the impossible gift of freedom from a creature who should have been his end. He stood up. There was no hesitation, no fear, just a sudden, undeniable purpose that settled in his bones like granite. He gave a low grunt to his family, a command to remain, and then he began to move. Each step was deliberate, earth-shaking, as he descended from his green, misty realm, his great form a dark river of muscle flowing down towards the plains. From his jeep, the ranger, Mark, watched the tragedy unfold through his binoculars. He'd been tracking Kaelen for weeks, documenting the old lion's decline with a heavy heart. He saw the fall. He saw the pride's cold abandonment. He saw the hyena's ghoulish arrival. His hand tightened on the steering wheel, his mind racing. He was too far away, his intervention would be too little, too late. He was about to start the engine when a movement on the distant volcanic slope caught his eye. He refocused his binoculars, frowning. It was a gorilla. But it wasn't foraging. It was moving, marching with a terrifying, relentless purpose down into the open grassland, into the heart of lion country. Mark lowered his binoculars, his mouth agape. "No way," he whispered to the empty cab. "That's impossible." Kongo did not walk into the clearing. He tore a path through the tall, dense elephant grass, parting it like a curtain as he emerged. His appearance was so sudden, so utterly alien to the context of the scene, that it brought a momentary, stunned silence. The hyenas snickering faltered, their heads snapping up. They had faced lions, leopards, and rival clans. They had never faced this. Kongo's sheer presence was an overwhelming force. He stood over Kaelen's broken body like a mountain that had learned to walk, a fortress of black fur and silent, concentrated fury. The hyena matriarch, emboldened by her numbers, let out a sharp, aggressive bark. In response, Kongo rose to his full, magnificent height. He drew a massive breath that seemed to pull in all the air on the plain, and then he beat his chest. It was not a simple thump. It was a concussive boom, a deep, hollow cannonade that felt less like a sound and more like a shockwave. It was the sound of thunder trapped in a barrel chest, a primal declaration of absolute power that cracked the very air. The hyenas shuffled back, their predatory confidence instantly shattered and replaced by a primal fear they had never known. One, perhaps younger or more foolish than the rest, broke from the pack and charged, a blur of teeth and mangy fur. Kongo didn't flinch. He turned, his movement a marvel of speed and economy for a creature his size. He didn't strike it. He simply reached out and caught the charging hyena by the scruff of its neck. With an air of pure, dismissive contempt, he lifted the snarling, thrashing beast as if it were a weightless sack of feathers and hurled it sideways. The hyena flew a good 20 feet, crashing into the thorny branches of an acacia tree with a sickening crunch. It did not get up. A wave of panic rippled through the pack. Another hyena, darting in from the side, managed to sink its teeth into Kongo's forearm. A grunt of pain, deep and guttural, escaped the gorilla's lips. But there was no panic in him, only a shift to a colder, more brutal focus. he didn't shake the hyena off. He used his free hand to grab its upper jaw, and with his bitten arm, he gripped the lower. Then, with a terrifying, deliberate flex of his incredible arm and shoulder muscles, he brutally pried its mouth apart. A sharp, wet crack echoed in the sudden silence as its jaw shattered. The hyena shrieked, a sound of pure agony, and scrambled away, whimpering, into the bush. In the midst of this violent storm, there was a moment of profound stillness. Kongo lowered his head and looked down at Kaelen. The old lion, barely conscious, lifted his head a fraction of an inch. Their gazes met. One pair of eyes, clouded with pain and disbelief, looked into another pair, dark and clear and filled with an unwavering, solemn purpose. It was not the look between predator and prey, or even between two different species. It was a look of mutual recognition, an acknowledgement of a debt being paid in blood and fury, an oath kept across the vast gulf of time. From his jeep, Mark fumbled for his radio, his voice trembling as he spoke. "Dispatch, you're not gonna believe this. I'm looking at something impossible. It's something out of a myth. Get the vet team ready. Now." Kongo straightened up, facing the remaining, terrified hyenas. He let out a final, deafening roar. It was not the roar of a lion. It was deeper, more ancient, a bellow that seemed to rise from the very core of the earth. It was the roar of a mountain waking from its slumber, a sound of absolute, unquestionable dominion. That was all it took. The hyenas broke. One by one, then all at once, they turned and fled, their predatory arrogance dissolving into a mad, cowardly scramble for safety. They vanished into the tall grass, their ghoulish laughter finally silenced, replaced by the reverent hush of the African dusk. The silence that fell was heavy and profound. The air, which moments before had been thick with violence, was now still. Kongo stood over Kaelen, his great chest heaving, the blood from the bite on his arm dripping slowly onto the dry earth. He looked down at the fallen king, and a gentleness that defied his terrifying frame descended upon him. He knelt, and with the scarred, massive knuckle of his index finger, he softly nudged Kaelen's cheek. It was a gesture of immense tenderness, a silent communication that transcended all language. Kaelen stirred, letting out a low, soft groan, not of pain, but of acknowledgement. Mark arrived, his boots crunching on the dry grass. He approached with his medical kit held out, his movements slow and cautious, his eyes wide with an awe that bordered on religious reverence. He stopped a respectful distance away. Kongo watched him, his gaze unblinking, a silent, unmoving guardian. He saw the kit, smelled the antiseptic, and seemed to understand the human's intent was not to harm, but to help. With a final, long look at Kaelen, Kongo gave a low, quiet grunt. The debt was paid. He turned. Without ceremony or sound, he began to walk back across the plains, his broad back a dark silhouette against the bleeding colors of the sunset. He was a king returning to his own kingdom, leaving the world of the savanna behind. Weeks later, a recovering Kaelen limped into the shade of a merciless tree where his pride rested. He bore new scars, but he walked with a new dignity. The other lions, even Maru, made way for him. He was no longer a challenger for the throne, but something far more potent, a living legend, a king who had been touched by a miracle. Mark returned to the site of the battle. There, preserved in the sun-baked mud near the acacia tree, he found what he was looking for. Two impressions, side by side, a story told in dirt. One was the large, distinct paw print of a lion. Next to it, larger and deeper, was the unmistakable, massive footprint of a silverback gorilla. He knelt, his heart pounding, and took a photo, preserving the impossible proof of a silent oath, carved in the heart of the wild. What does loyalty mean to you? Have you ever witnessed an act of courage that defied all expectations? Comment below and share your story. Give a sign of respect for Kongo's incredible act of honor. Like this video, share it with someone who believes in promises kept, and subscribe for more stories that reveal the hidden soul of the wild.